Welcome to In a Nutshell, the podcast dedicated to all things agricultural consulting. I'm Dylan Brush here with soil genius and ag consultant Bill Brush, and we're delighted to accompany you on this journey where we break down the different aspects of agricultural consulting. In each episode, we'll dive into the realm of agriculture through the eyes of Bill Brush, where consultants like Bill play a vital role in empowering farmers, agribusiness, and agricultural organizations. If you're passionate about agriculture, problem solving, and enjoy a little bit of detective work, this podcast is tailor-made for you.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to In a Nutshell. This is Bill Brush. Today we're going to talk a little bit about maybe garden selection and what you want to put a garden in your backyard or out, even in your front yard, wherever you've got the space to put it out, and what might be the choices you would have on putting out a vegetable garden, and what else you might be able to put in your landscaping around your house. And they can add color, and they can also add some pretty good nutrition with, fruits and vegetables. So we're going to talk about more of a garden plot today, and we'll start with that. So it's approaching wintertime right now, and we're going to get mid to late fall here before you know it. And one of the things that grows really well during this time is what we call brassicas, or the broccoli, the cauliflower, the Brussels sprouts, and also cereal grains. Although those cereal grains, you may not be planting them to actually consume, it's a good time to maybe plant it somewhere in your garden to be able to take that material and break it down and put that carbon material to work back in the soil. And in the old days, we used to call that a green manure crop. But basically, it pulls those nutrients up into the plant, and then you grind that back up, work it back into your soil. And basically, as Dr. William Albrecht has said many times, that anything that's been through a plant or an animal becomes more bioavailable to the next species it runs across. So the first thing that happens to that mass that you work back in for building up soil humus, and there are not as many choices of things to grow, so it's a good time in the wintertime to do that. And so by working that back in, that gives the microbial population a good source of carbon that they really are seeking, and at the same time is keeping that balance of carbon to nitrogen in your soil, so that those microbes can then break it down and return those nutrients, and they become even more available to your plants when they are able to pick those up. They're also in a form like that it's not going to leach out of your soil. So the nitrogen that they have there in the ammonium position will basically stay bound to that carbon for quite a while before it is taken up by the microbiology. So when we're looking at that, those brassicas are really a good winter crop. Why do we grow them in the wintertime? Well, because our choices are not as great. A lot of other crops that you're trying to grow in the wintertime suffer from colder temperatures, maybe saturated soil. And those temperatures, what they do is they don't allow the normal nitrification cycle to take place. So if you are applying nitrogens with ammonium, or that's being released by your soil humus, or your cover crops or green manure crops, those type of things, they have a lot of ammonium, and in colder temperatures, they don't convert to nitrate. And because they don't convert to nitrate, or nitrate not near as fast to nitrate, what happens is those plants that you are growing for, say your leafy greens, your lettuces, even things like cabbage. You can look also at several things like cilantro. They're just anything that you would grow, say, for a leafy green, your parsley, those kind of crops that you're using, maybe alternatives. They take up too much ammonium. And when plants get too much ammonium, they become more reproductive, meaning they want to form seed. Well, when you're growing broccoli, or you're growing those florets, are its reproductive body. When you're growing cauliflower, that's its big head, is that reproductive portion. Brussels sprouts is the same thing. And what you're doing is you're trying to grow reproductive crops in that wintertime when ammonium becomes more plentiful. And because they're taking up higher amounts of it, it's a great crop to grow. Now you want to obviously harvest them before those flower, because then you've waited too long, but you'll get tremendous growth on it establishing that reproductive body, as opposed to say head lettuce or cabbage, when it gets too much ammonium, what it will do is what we call bolt, and it'll basically start to grow its seed head. And then at that point, it'll take up those sugars and starches so that it can make the seed head and put it up there so that it has plenty of nutrition to reproduce. Because that basically is what those plants want to do, is reproduce, as opposed to what we want, which is just that vegetative part of the different types of lettuces, the head lettuce, red and green leaf lettuce, butter lettuce. They all are in that situation where they'll bolt if they're trying to be grown in too wet and too cold a condition. So when we get to the spring, then that's an ideal time for us to get that, because we need to get our soil temps, those in the top inch or two of the soils, get them up into the 80s. And then we can begin to convert nitrate from ammonium to nitrate. Another way you can get around that is early in the spring, use mostly nitrate fertilizers, because what you're trying to do is grow a vegetative crop. And there's some good products out there, both liquid and dry. I'm not necessarily going to go on products as much today as when we get into actual growing individual crops and what your nutrition program for these kind of crops would be. As we get to the hotter parts of the year, we're looking to other different crops, say like tomatoes, which thrive in a lot of hot temperatures. And we want them to be able to put on a lot of blooms. So getting our nutrition right as we get to that summertime becomes very, very important. And some of those micronutrients, and also with ammonium-based fertilizers, give it an opportunity to go reproductive, which is what we really want. But we also need to grow a tremendous lot of vegetation to be able to cover that fruit of that tomato, and also to be able to get the colors we want. And so these summertime is what we really are looking for tomatoes. And there's other crops similar to tomatoes, say eggplant, corn, sweet corn particularly, where you're planting it on the edges maybe of your garden to have a little bit of corn. Those are things that really react really well to those hotter temperatures. And as we get to the fall, we have kind of a combination of where you are in the world as to how warm your fall is, that you can maybe run these further and further into the fall. I know in California, we have different seasons here where our coastal climates of down the coast, what we call the salad bowl of California, the Salinas Valley, and even farther down south as we go. Once a lot of those growers get into the late summer, early fall, they're taking their growing operations, they're going down to Arizona, sometimes around Yuma and other places in Arizona. Why? Because it's warmer temperatures, and that's what you need to continue to grow these leafy greens. In the meantime, they'll be doing these things like putting these cover crops up in the Salinas Valley and planting those brassicas, the broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts I'm talking about. It's really important that the underlying message here, that I'm probably not explaining as well as I'd like to, is the outside forces of the environment, the weather, the rain, the overall temperature, the lack of temperature, how cold it gets, how many chilling hours you get, how many heat units do you get, is really what determines what you can grow. I always like to tell people, you don't see a lot of pineapple grown in California, and one of the major reasons is we don't have a tropical climate. We don't see bananas grown here. You need certain types of climates to grow certain types of crops. And a lot of the ones you need to check and see where your best time to grow is based on, and part of what I'm going to really talking about is you doing a little research on your area to get a climate map of, over a period of time, here's the temperatures, average temperatures for January, February, March, all the way through December. And then you fit your garden and planting times based around when those temperatures make it the most optimum. You can have everything in perfect order. Your soil's perfect, your plant, your water, everything's perfect, except you got terrible temperatures or terrible climate for what you're trying to grow. You're not going to be successful. So get a climate map out, and they're found. You can get on a lot of websites and find out what's the climate like for my town, my area, and the average, and that's what you go off of, rather than start to try to plant something that's too early. We get people here in California sometimes that they've got their groundwork up, and they'll plant a crop that's very sensitive to frost in March, because normally we are frost free going forward, but all of a sudden we have a late freeze and it wipes out the crop. Well, that'd be the same thing with your garden. You're not exempt from the same things that agriculture is, because guess what? You are agriculture if you're growing a garden. The other thing I would talk about, not necessarily in a garden plot, but you might have a real place in your backyard of a bigger area that you may want to plant some fruit trees, or nut trees. And so you need to have a little bit different situation when you're going to think about, putting part of that. The numbers apply in terms of how big an area back to how many square feet, and then figuring out that with 43,560 as how many square feet in an acre, as to how much you're actually farming around that single apricot tree or that single peach tree. Also, if you're growing something like a nut crop, you may find, I need something that pollinates this. I also would need to attract some type of pollinator, which would be the bee population. Some of these crops are best, that we're trying to grow, are also aided by pollination. And so also understanding, where am I? If I'm in an urban jungle with not a lot of asphalt around me, getting enough bees to get pollination wouldn't be probably very practical unless you want to go into the beekeeping business, and that's a whole different entity by itself. But we get back to some of these fruit trees, and they can be citrus, they can be even avocados, olives, what we call deciduous, which are trees that lose their leaves and actually have a period of dormancy. If you are in an area that never gets cold enough, the deciduous trees never do very well, okay? So you put them into more tropical climates, they will not be near as successful as if you get something that's what I call a mixed climate, which has seasons of cold, followed by seasons of warm, hot, back to warm, and back to cold again. And you go through those seasons. That's where deciduous trees excel. But you also need a lot of these deciduous trees to be frost-free for certain long periods of time. So a lot of the crops in your area are there for a reason. You don't see avocados grown in the Central Valley of California because they really can only exist and thrive and do well. The tree will be fine, but you won't get a lot of avocados unless you are in a 100% frost-free area. One of the reasons is they're not deciduous. They don't lose their leaves. They are essentially growing 12 months out of the year. The same could be said of an olive tree, but an olive tree is much hardier and its fruit develops much more rapidly than an avocado. An avocado is a more than a year project to grow one from a bloom to a set, to grow the seed and the fruit of an avocado. So you have to have more than one full year. When olives come out, say, to bloom and set, is more in the spring and summer. So they're adapted to a lot of more variable climate than, say, an avocado is. But they're not affected by frost because their fruiting's not really exposed to those temperatures. Citrus is a little bit mixed bag. Some are more exposed, some are able to keep warm enough, but they like primarily more frost resistance, and they're also a crop that does not lose its leaves. So they aren't bound by those things of chilling hours that you would need for, say, most of the nut crops. So all of these are in there. So when you just decide out of the blue, I want to grow an avocado tree, and I'm in a very, very cold temperature, you're not going to be successful of growing too many avocados to get to fruition so that they're actually able to be consumed. So know your climate. Get your climate so you know, if I want to plant some trees, what are best suited for me? And a lot of times your local, Farm Bureau, ag supplier, you're not going to find a lot of expertise that the normal lawn and garden places when it comes to fruit trees, etc. They may have some. Look at the labels, but also look who's supplying those. See who's growing those trees that you may be buying at one of these lawn and garden places. And then either get on their website to find out what they say, or actually contact them and ask them for some questions about what you're trying to do and what you want to do. The one thing you need to know, of course, with trees is they take a lot more space. You know, their trees need to be deeply rooted because they need to support a canopy of a tree. I always like to say you like to have about 20 feet for a home situation, 20 feet from around that tree. Put the tree in the middle and draw about 20 feet around it. Initially, you'll think that's way too much until that tree starts to really go and fill its canopy out. But 20 feet is a good standard deal for around your house. Now, you can get some other trees like a dwarf lemon or a dwarf lime, and you can put them in a little corner of your yard, and they'll thrive. And you can do that by pruning and keeping them at a manageable site because they'll be really fruitful. And because of that, you don't need a huge canopy. In Central Valley, I've grown almonds and walnuts for years, okay? And an average almond tree, basically when it's really good and productive, is going to produce about 30 pounds of actual nut meats per tree. So you could grow one almond tree and you could grow 30 pounds. The problem with an almond tree, I need two. I need something that will cross-pollinate most of these. We have a few varieties lately, however, that are what we call self-fertile, which means they can fertilize themselves. And so they can pollinate themselves. The pollen will actually be transferred to that flower, through the flower, and get basically on the ovule and get it fertilized so that you can produce them. Those varieties are usually, there's several new ones. I'm not trying to give you any one of those as to make one better than another, but it's another one. If you've only got a space for one tree and you want to grow an almond tree, then you'll need to use one of these self-fertile ones. Unless you're around a lot of almond trees around your area that are close, within a quarter mile or so, then you'll get some stray pollen from those other orchards. Better to start with the self-fertile varieties. So, as you can see, there's a lot of decisions that go into farming, go into gardening, and it's basically the same thing as farming, but on a smaller scale. Farmers are trying to grow food for many people, and you're trying to grow food for yourself, your family, and maybe neighbors around you as a great gift. And as we go through our gardening series, what you're going to find is that if you follow the details that I lay out, you're going to have a wonderful garden that will produce very, very nutritious food, and it'll taste really good, and most of it will have great shelf life. And what better things to reward your neighbors for just a little bonus. Take them over a bunch of really good produce, fruits and vegetables, which we've all seen in every diet we've ever seen, is that more fruits and vegetables in your diet is going to make you a healthier person. And when you make healthier fruits and vegetables, they're even going to help your nutritional program even more. So that's all I've got for today. I'll get back to you soon. Thanks.
Thank you for another fantastic episode of Agriculture in a Nutshell, Bill. I'm sure that everyone listening absolutely loved what you had to say about gardening in the third episode in this gardening series. The insight as to what crops do best in what seasons, as well as there are different seasons that different crops do better in. All in all, another great episode. As for all the listeners, please remember to leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and always stay curious.